the elevator chimed, a gentle, melodic sound that was grotesquely out of place with the storm brewing inside Ruth Matthews. In her hand, she clutched a small, gift-wrapped box containing a pair of silver baby booties, an impulsive, joyful purchase. At 7 months pregnant, everything felt momentous. She pictured the look on her husband Simon's face, the surprise, the soft smile that reached his tired eyes. He'd been working so hard, closing the Melendez deal. She pushed open the heavy glass door to the executive suite, her heart fluttering. And then, through the sliver of a gap in his office door, she heard it. Not the focused tone of a business call, but a low, intimate laugh. A woman's laugh. A sound that, in a single, horrifying second, would shatter her world into a million irreparable pieces. The 37th floor of the Nolan Industries Tower was Simon's kingdom, a testament to his relentless ambition, sculpted from glass, steel, and sweeping views of the Manhattan skyline. For Ruth, it had always felt like a second home, a place where she was welcomed with deferential smiles. Today, however, an invisible barrier seemed to have sprung up around Simon's corner office. The usual hum of activity in the executive wing was muted, and his assistant's desk was conspicuously empty. A strange, primal instinct coiled in Ruth's belly, tightening its grip around the life she carried. She pushed the thought away. It was foolish. Simon was devoted, a man who kissed her burgeoning stomach each morning before he left and whispered plans for their child's future each night. She took a soft step forward, the plush carpet silencing her approach. The door to his office was ajar, just enough to frame a scene not meant for her eyes. Simon was leaning against his massive mahogany desk, his usual power stance softened. Before him stood Lorena Hobson, a junior analyst from the acquisitions department. Ruth recognized her from the company holiday party, sharp, ambitious, with eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Lorena wasn't presenting a report. Her hand was resting on Simon's chest, her fingers tracing the line of his tie. Her head was tilted back, and that low, throaty laugh Ruth had heard from the hallway spilled from her lips again. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated intimacy. Simon wasn't pushing her away. His own hand was on her arm, his thumb making slow, possessive circles on her skin. He was smiling down at her, a private, unguarded smile Ruth hadn't seen in months. It was the smile he'd given her on their second date, the one that had promised a world of safety and devotion. Time seemed to warp, stretching and thinning until it snapped. The air in Ruth's lungs turned to ice. The silver box in her hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Her fingers went numb, and the gift slipped, hitting the marble floor with a soft, dull thud that sounded like a gunshot in the silent hallway. Both heads in the office whipped toward the sound. Simon froze. It wasn't a gradual stiffening. It was a complete system failure. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, horrified mask. His smile vanished, replaced by the slack-jawed terror of a man whose two carefully separated worlds had just collided with catastrophic force. His hand dropped from Lorena's arm as if it had been burned. Lorena's expression shifted just as quickly, from seductive confidence to wide-eyed panic. She took a clumsy step back, her hands flying up as if to ward off an invisible blow. But all Ruth could see was Simon. His eyes, those brilliant blue eyes that had promised her forever, were now wide with the sheer horror of being caught. In them, she saw not remorse, not love for her, but the raw, selfish fear of a king whose castle was crumbling. She took a single step into the doorway, her gaze sweeping over the scene. The half-empty glass of whiskey on the desk, Lorena's slightly disheveled blouse, the charged, guilty energy that saturated the air. The evidence was irrefutable. a verdict delivered without a trial. Ruth. Simon's voice was a choked whisper, a sound she'd never heard from him before. He took a step towards her, his hand outstretched, a reflexive gesture of appeasement. Ruth flinched back, as if he were carrying a disease. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. A terrifying, preternatural calm washed over her, the kind that precedes an earthquake. She looked from his desperate face to Lorena's terrified one, and then her eyes landed on the fallen gift on the floor. The tiny silver booties, a promise of a shared future, of tiny feet that would patter down their hallways, of a love that was supposed to be pure and unbreakable. Now, the box just sat there, a pathetic, discarded symbol of a lie. She finally looked back at Simon, and the look in her eyes was one he would never forget. It was not the fiery anger he might have expected, or the pleading sorrow he might have known how to handle. It was a look of utter and complete desolation, as if he had reached into her chest and snuffed out the very light of her soul. Without a word, she turned. Her movements were stiff, robotic. She didn't run. She walked, each step deliberate and heavy, out of the executive suite, past the curious glances of the returning employees, and into the gleaming, soulless elevator. As the doors slid shut, sealing her in the mirrored box, she finally met her own reflection. A stranger stared back at her, a pale, hollowed-out woman, with the ghost of a dead future in her eyes. The first sob tore from her throat, then a raw, ragged sound of a life breaking in two. The moment the elevator doors closed, swallowing Ruth from view, the paralysis that had gripped Simon Nolan shattered. It was replaced by a surge of pure, unadulterated adrenaline, the same ruthless, problem-solving instinct that had made him a millionaire by 30. His first thought was not of his wife's heart, but of the integrity of the scene, the optics, the potential for fallout. "Get out!" he snapped, his voice a low, dangerous growl. He didn't even look at Lorena. Lorena Hobson, who had been frozen in a state of mortified terror, flinched at the command. "Simon, I didn't know she was—" "I said, get out!" he repeated, turning on her with such ferocity that she physically recoiled. His face was a mask of cold fury. In that instant, she wasn't his confidant, his escape. She was a piece of evidence, a liability that needed to be scrubbed from the premises. Now, Lorena, the illusion of their connection, the whispered promises of a future, the fantasy that she was more than just a diversion, it all evaporated under the Arctic blast of his command. She saw herself clearly for the first time, a tool, a disposable asset. Humiliation warred with fear on her face. With a choked sob, she grabbed her purse from the chair, straightened her blouse with shaking hands, and fled the office, her heels clicking a panicked retreat on the marble floor. Simon didn't watch her go. He was already in motion, his mind a whirlwind of strategic calculations. He strode to his door and closed it with a firm, definitive click. He snatched the fallen gift box from the floor, his fingers clumsy on the ribbon, and shoved it into his desk drawer, out of sight. Out of mind. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over Ruth's contact. What do I say? How do I spin this? His mind raced through a Rolodex of excuses, each one flimsier than the last. She was upset about a work review. She tripped. I was comforting her. The absurdity of it was laughable. He had been caught, red-handed, in the most damning of clichés. He dialed her number. It rang and rang, before clicking over to her voicemail. "Ruth, baby, pick up the phone," he began, his voice strained, attempting a tenderness that felt utterly fraudulent. "Listen, what you saw, it was not what it looked like. It was a complete misunderstanding. Lorena was she was emotional. Please, just call me. We need to talk about this." He hung up and immediately sent a text. "Please call me. I love you. It's not what you think." A lie. It was exactly what she thought. He paced his office like a caged animal, the stunning city view now feeling like a mocking panorama of all he stood to lose. This wasn't just about his marriage, it was about his image. Simon Nolan, the family man, the stable, brilliant CEO whose personal life was as impeccable as his company's balance sheet. A messy public divorce, especially with a pregnant wife, could spook investors. It could tarnish the brand he had bled for. His phone buzzed. He snatched it up, his heart leaping with a desperate hope. It wasn't Ruth. It was a text from Luis Melendez, his COO and the closest thing he had to a friend. "Luis, deal is signed. Their board just approved. We own it all. Time to crack the champagne." The Melendez acquisition. The deal he'd been working on for 6 months, the crowning achievement of his year. Any other day, this news would have sent him soaring. Today, it felt like ash in his mouth. He stared at the message, the triumph of it turning sour. He needed to control the narrative. He strode to his desk, took a deep breath, and dialed Luis. "We did it," Simon said, forcing a triumphant tone into his voice. "Tell the team I'm buying a round at the Campbell tonight. Top shelf." "That's the Simon I know," Luis's voice boomed through the phone. "You sound a little off, man. Everything okay? I thought you'd be breaking down the door with this news." Simon ran a hand over his face. The mask of control was slipping. "Just a long day. Listen, Luis, have you seen Ruth? She was supposed to stop by." There was a slight pause on the other end. "Yeah, actually. I saw her leaving the elevator bay about 10 minutes ago. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. I tried to say hi, but she walked right past me. Is everything all right at home?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken suspicion. Luis was sharp. He didn't miss much. "Everything's fine," Simon lied, the words tasting like poison. "Just a small disagreement. You know how it is. Hormones." He hated himself for saying it, for using his wife's pregnancy as a shield for his own betrayal. But survival instinct had taken over, drowning out shame, drowning out everything but the desperate need to put out the fire. "Right," Luis said, his tone unconvinced. "Well, I'll let the team know about drinks. You sure you're good?" "I'm the king of the world, Luis," Simon said, the bravado feeling hollow even to his own ears. "I'll see you tonight." He ended the call and slumped into his leather chair, the manufactured confidence draining out of him, leaving a cold, terrifying void. He had sent his mistress away. He had lied to his best friend. He had reduced his pregnant wife's legitimate pain to a hormonal episode. He had done everything to manage the crisis, except for the one thing that mattered: feel a single, honest pang of remorse for the woman whose heart he had just pulverized. Ruth didn't go home. The thought of their perfectly curated Greenwich Village brownstone, a space she had poured her heart into decorating, turning it into a sanctuary for their coming family, was unbearable. Every throw pillow, every framed photo, every lovingly chosen paint color would feel like a silent accusation. The house was no longer a home. It was a stage set for a play whose lead actor had been revealed as a fraud. Her feet, seemingly of their own accord, carried her south. She walked for what felt like hours, a ghost moving through the bustling afternoon crowds of Manhattan. The city's cacophony, the blaring horns, the distant sirens, the chatter of 1,000 lives intersecting, was a dull, distant roar. The only sound she could truly hear was the frantic, panicked thumping of her own heart and the echo of a woman's laughter in a glass office. She found herself in Washington Square Park, sinking onto a cold bench near the fountain. A young couple sat nearby, sharing a pretzel, their heads bent close together, whispering secrets. A father pushed his giggling toddler on a swing. Life, in all its infuriating mundane beauty, was simply continuing all around her, oblivious to the fact that her own had just ended. A sharp cramp seized her abdomen, and she gasped, her hand flying to her belly. The baby kicked, a strong, insistent thump against her palm, as if to say, "I'm still here. What are we going to do?" Tears, hot and blinding, finally came. They weren't the clean, quiet tears of sadness. They were the racking, ugly sobs of absolute betrayal, a physical expulsion of the poison that had just been injected into her soul. She cried for the woman she was an hour ago, so full of naive joy and hope. She cried for the baby who would now be born into a broken world. And she cried for the man she thought she knew, the man who had apparently never existed at all. Her phone had been buzzing in her purse relentlessly. Simon. A dozen missed calls, a string of texts. "Ruth, where are you?" "This is all a misunderstanding. Please let me explain. I'm worried about you." And the baby. That last one sent a fresh wave of rage through her. The baby. He dared to use their child as a pawn in his desperate plea. He hadn't been thinking about the baby when he had another woman's hands on him, when he was smiling that secret, intimate smile. With trembling fingers, she powered the phone off. The silence was a relief, a small act of severing the connection, of reclaiming a tiny sliver of control in a world that had spun completely off its axis. She needed an anchor. She needed someone who existed outside of Simon's orbit. Her fingers, still shaking, dialed her older sister, Chloe, a no-nonsense ER doctor in Chicago who had never been fully convinced of Simon's perfection. Chloe picked up on the second ring. "Ruth, what's wrong? You never call in the middle of a weekday." Ruth opened her mouth, but only a choked sob came out. "Ruthie, talk to me. Are you okay? Is it the baby?" Chloe's voice sharpened with professional concern. "He's having an affair," Ruth finally managed to whisper, the words feeling foreign and vile on her tongue. There was a beat of stunned silence on the other end of the line. Then Chloe's voice, stripped of all gentleness, returned. "That son of a bitch. Where are you right now?" "A park. I don't know what to do, Chloe." "Okay, listen to me," Chloe said, her tone shifting into the calm, authoritative command she used during medical emergencies. "First, you are not going back to that house. Not tonight. Do you have your wallet?" "Yes." "Good. Book a room at a hotel. A nice one. Use the emergency credit card, the one he doesn't see the statements for. Get a suite. Order room service. And then you're going to sit there and breathe. That's all you have to do today. Just breathe. I'm booking the first flight out tomorrow morning. I'll be there by 10. The simple, actionable instructions cut through the fog of Ruth's despair. A plan. A next step. It was all she could handle. "Okay," she whispered, the word a fragile lifeline. "And Ruth?" "Yeah." "You're not broken," Chloe said, her voice fierce with a protective love that felt like a shield. "He is. Remember that." After the call, Ruth felt a subtle shift inside her. The hysterical, wounded part of her was still there, but a new layer was beginning to form over it, thin and brittle but present. It was a layer of cold, hard clarity. The image of Simon's face when she walked in replayed in her mind. The fear in his eyes wasn't for her, or for their marriage. It was the fear of consequence, the fear of a mess. She had been a part of his perfect life story, the beautiful, intelligent wife who provided the perfect backdrop for his meteoric rise. And the baby was the next chapter. It was all part of the Simon Nolan brand. She stood up from the bench, her back aching, her body heavy with the weight of both her child and her grief. She was not just a wronged wife. She was an asset in a portfolio, and he was now in damage control mode to prevent a depreciation. As she walked toward the street to hail a cab, a steely resolve began to replace the shock. He had mistaken her quiet love for weakness, her trust for naivete. He thought this was a problem he could manage, a fire he could extinguish with a few well-chosen lies. He was about to find out how wrong he was. The atmosphere at the Campbell, a lavish bar tucked into Grand Central Terminal, was electric. The senior executive team of Nolan Industries was celebrating, their voices loud and their laughter echoing off the ornate vaulted ceilings. At the center of it all was Simon, playing the part of the conquering hero. He held a glass of Macallan 25, nodding as his team toasted the Melendez acquisition, a deal that would cement his legacy as a titan of the tech industry. He smiled. He shook hands. He accepted congratulations. But behind the facade, his mind was a maelstrom. Every time the bar door opened, his head would snap up, a desperate, foolish part of him hoping to see Ruth walk in, ready to accept his half-baked apology. Every buzz of his phone in his pocket sent a jolt through him. But it was never her. It was just another congratulatory message, another person celebrating a victory that felt utterly hollow. Luis Melendez watched him from across the table, his dark eyes narrowed with concern. He knew Simon better than anyone. He'd been with him since the garage startup days, had seen him at his most brilliant and his most ruthless, and he'd never seen him look so haunted in a moment of triumph. "You're a million miles away," Luis said, sliding into the seat next to him. "Just savoring the win, my friend," Simon deflected, taking a large gulp of scotch. "Bullshit," Luis said bluntly. "I talked to my assistant. She saw Ruth leave the building today. Said she looked like she'd been hit by a bus. Then you blow me off with some lame excuse about hormones. What did you do, Simon?" The question was direct, stripped of deference. It was friend to friend, not COO to CEO. Simon swirled the amber liquid in his glass, avoiding Luis's gaze. "It's complicated." "Complicated how? Is it Lorena Hobson?" Simon's head snapped up, his eyes wide with alarm. "What do you know about Lorena?" Luis let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head in disappointment. "Simon, I'm the COO. I see everything. The late-night expense reports for dinners for two. The business trips, where her travel mysteriously aligns with yours. I'm not blind. I just assumed you were smart enough not to shit where you eat. And I damn well assumed you were smart enough to end it when Ruth got pregnant." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "So I'll ask you again. What did you do?" The accusation, so plainly stated, stripped away the last of Simon's bravado. He slumped in his chair, the weight of his transgression finally pressing down on him. "She walked in on us, Luis. Ruth walked in and saw us in my office." Luis swore under his breath, a long, sharp hiss. He leaned back, running a hand over his face. "Jesus, Simon! Of all the stupid, reckless... In your office? What were you thinking?" "I wasn't," Simon admitted, his voice barely audible over the din of the bar. "It just happened. It was a mistake." "A mistake is spilling coffee on your shirt," Luis retorted, his voice laced with contempt. "This was a series of choices, a year-long series of choices. And for what? For an ambitious analyst who looks at you like you're a stepping stone." "It wasn't like that," Simon argued weakly. "Lorena, she gets it. The pressure, the drive. With Ruth, everything became about nesting, about baby-proofing the world. I just needed an escape." Luis stared at him, his expression hardening. "An escape? You have a wife who adores you, who gave up her own promising career in art curation to support yours. A woman who is carrying your child. And you needed an escape? You're not a titan, Simon. You're a coward. You're terrified of the one thing you can't control, the one thing that demands you be a selfless human being instead of a ruthless CEO. And now you've probably destroyed it. The word coward struck a nerve deep inside Simon. He was the man who faced down hostile boards, who crushed competitors, who gambled millions on instinct and won. But Louise was right. Faced with the profound, emotional reality of fatherhood and unconditional love, he had panicked and sought refuge in the transactional, controllable world of a workplace affair. "I can fix this," Simon insisted, the words a desperate mantra. "I just need to talk to her. I'll buy her a new car, a trip to Paris, whatever she wants." Louise shook his head in disgust. "You still don't get it, do you? You think this is a negotiation. You think you can acquire forgiveness like you acquired the Melendez group. Ruth's heart isn't a line item on a balance sheet, you idiot. You can't put a price on trust." He stood up, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. The celebratory noise of the bar seemed to fade around them. "Enjoy your victory, Simon. You paid a hell of a price for it." Louise walked away, leaving Simon alone in the crowd, the expensive scotch tasting like acid in his throat. He looked around at his cheering employees, at the empire he had built, and for the first time in his life, Simon Nolan felt utterly, terrifyingly bankrupt. Ruth spent the night in a suite at the Carlyle, a place of quiet, old-world elegance that felt like a different universe from her life. She didn't sleep. She sat in the dark on a silk armchair, watching the city lights twinkle below, feeling a profound and terrifying emptiness. The shock had receded, leaving behind a landscape of raw, throbbing pain. But with the first light of dawn, something else began to rise within her. A cold, clear, unyielding anger. It wasn't the hot, explosive rage she might have expected. It was a quiet, focused fury. The kind that crystallizes under immense pressure. Her sister Chloe arrived at 10, as promised, her face etched with a mixture of rage and concern. She didn't offer platitudes or hugs. She simply took one look at Ruth's pale, set face and said, "Okay." What's the first move? That was all Ruth needed. She spent the morning on the phone, not with friends, but with professionals. The first call was to the top divorce attorney in New York City, a woman known for her merciless, surgical dismantling of wealthy philanderers. The second was to a financial advisor, instructing them to quietly begin the process of untangling her personal assets from Simon's labyrinthine corporate structures. By the time she left the hotel in the late afternoon, she was no longer just a victim. She was a woman with a strategy. She took a cab to the brownstone. Walking through the front door was the hardest thing she'd ever done. The scent of the house, a mix of lemon polish, old books, and the faint, lingering scent of Simon's cologne, was a physical blow. A picture from their wedding day sat on the console table, two smiling strangers from another lifetime. She took the silver frame and laid it face down. She moved through the house with a detached, methodical purpose. In the nursery, she paused. The room was bathed in soft afternoon light, the pale yellow walls she'd chosen radiating a gentle warmth. The crib was assembled, a mobile of hand-stitched felt animals hanging above it. A wave of grief so powerful it buckled her knees washed over her, and she had to grip the doorframe to stay upright. This was the heart of the future he had stolen. After a long moment, she straightened up, her jaw tight, and closed the door. She would deal with this later. She was in their bedroom, packing a suitcase with her essentials, when she heard his key in the lock. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain calm, folding a sweater with steady hands. Simon entered the room hesitantly, his face a mess of exhaustion, fear, and a desperate, manufactured hope. He was holding a massive bouquet of white roses, Ruth's favorite. "Ruth," he breathed, his voice thick with relief. "Thank God. I've been calling you. I was so worried." He stopped short when he saw the open suitcase on the bed. The roses in his hand suddenly looked foolish, a pathetic, inadequate gesture. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice cracking. Ruth didn't look at him. She continued to pack. "What does it look like I'm doing, Simon? Don't do this," he pleaded, stepping closer. "We can talk this through. Let me explain." "Explain what?" she finally said, turning to face him. Her voice was devoid of emotion, as flat and cold as a sheet of ice. "Should you explain the logistics of sleeping with your subordinate? Or perhaps you could explain the precise moment you decided our marriage vows were optional. Or maybe, and this is my favorite, you can explain how you looked me in the eye this morning, kissed our child through my stomach, and then went to work to be with her." Each question was a perfectly aimed dart, and Simon flinched with everyone. It wasn't like that. It meant nothing, Ruth. It was a mistake. It stopped being a mistake and started being a pattern a long time ago, didn't it? She asked, her gaze unwavering. She saw the flicker of guilt in his eyes and knew she was right. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was a lifestyle. "I love you," he said, the word sounding hollow and rehearsed. "You and the baby are my world." At that, Ruth let out a short, bitter laugh. "My world was in that office yesterday, and you incinerated it. You don't get to use our baby as your shield or your bargaining chip. This," she said, gesturing between the two of them, "is over." He stared at her, finally understanding. This wasn't a fight. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a verdict. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice small. "Chloe's flying in. I'll stay with her for a while. After that, it's none of your concern," she said, zipping the suitcase closed with a sharp, final sound. "My lawyer will be in touch with yours on Monday morning." The word lawyer landed like a grenade in the quiet room. Simon's face went pale. This was real. The neat, controlled compartments of his life were not just leaking. They were hemorrhaging. Ruth picked up her suitcase and walked towards the door. He moved to block her path, his hands raised in a gesture of supplication. "Ruth, please, don't. Think about our child." She stopped and looked at him, her eyes filled with a pity that was somehow more damning than hatred. "Oh, I am, Simon," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I am thinking about nothing but my child, and my child will not be raised in a house built on lies. My child will be raised by a mother who taught them the meaning of integrity and self-respect." She stepped around him, her shoulder brushing his, and walked out of the bedroom, out of the house, and out of the life they had built together, leaving him standing alone in the wreckage. For Simon, the 2 days following Ruth's departure were a disorienting blend of panic and denial. He functioned on autopilot, attending meetings, making calls, and projecting an aura of unshakable control to the outside world. But inside his glass office, the silence was deafening. He'd stare at the chair where Lorena had sat, then at the door through which Ruth had appeared, the scene replaying in his mind like a horror film. He had tried everything. He'd left a dozen more voicemails, each more desperate than the last. He'd sent a courier to Chloe's apartment with a handwritten letter, which was promptly returned, unopened. He'd even called Ruth's mother, only to be met with a glacial fury that made him hang up in shame. The Nolan charm, the persuasive power that swayed boards and investors, was useless here. He was locked out. His frustration, unable to find purchase on Ruth, began to curdle into resentment, and he aimed it at the only other person involved, Lorena Hobson. He saw her as the catalyst, the careless spark that had ignited the inferno. It was irrational, he knew, but it was easier than confronting the abyss of his own culpability. He summoned her to his office on Friday afternoon. Lorena entered cautiously, her face pale and drawn. The confident, ambitious analyst was gone, replaced by a young woman who looked haunted. She hadn't slept in 2 days, replaying her own role in the disaster. She had allowed herself to believe Simon's vague promises, interpreting his attention as a sign of a genuine future, not a temporary escape. Ruth's appearance had shattered her delusions as thoroughly as it had shattered Ruth's marriage. "Sit down, Lorena," Simon said, his tone clipped and impersonal. He didn't rise from his desk. He was CEO Nolan, not Simon the lover. She sat on the edge of the chair, her hands clenched in her lap. "Simon, I am so sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix this," he cut her off coldly. "This situation is untenable. Your presence in this company is now a complication I cannot afford." Lorena stared at him, bewildered. What are you saying?" "I'm saying your time at Nolan Industries has come to an end," he stated flatly. He pushed a folder across the desk. "This is a severance agreement. It's generous. 6 months' salary. In return, you will sign a non-disclosure agreement of the strictest possible terms. You will not speak of this, or of me, to anyone. Ever." The sheer, brutal transactional nature of the dismissal struck Lorena with the force of a physical slap. He was firing her, erasing her, paying her for her silence. There was no concern for her career, her reputation, or her feelings. She was simply a problem to be disposed of. "You're firing me," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "After everything? You told me. You said you were unhappy. You said you saw a future for us." Simon leaned back, his expression hardening into one of pure, contemptuous dismissal. "You are an analyst, Lorena. You should have analyzed the situation more accurately. You were a diversion, not a destination. Did you honestly believe I would leave my pregnant wife for you?" The cruelty of the words was breathtaking. It was a deliberate, calculated strike, designed to wound and silence her. And it worked. The last vestiges of her affection for him curdled into a bitter, burning shame. She had been a fool, a pawn in his selfish game. "You're a monster," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of heartbreak and rage. "I'm a pragmatist," he corrected. "Sign the papers, Lorena. It's the best deal you're going to get." She looked from his merciless face to the folder on the desk. Every instinct screamed at her to tear it up, to scream, to expose him for the hypocrite he was. But then what? She'd be blacklisted in the industry, the woman who had an affair with a powerful CEO and tried to cause a scandal. He would crush her. This was the power imbalance made manifest. He held all the cards. With a hand that shook so badly she could barely hold the pen, she signed the documents. She pushed the folder back across the desk and stood up, her dignity in tatters. "For what it's worth," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "Your wife, she seemed like a good person. I hope she takes you for every single penny you have." She walked out of his office for the last time, leaving Simon with his checkbook and his NDAs. He had successfully neutralized one threat. He had cauterized a wound. But as he sat there in the sterile silence, he didn't feel powerful. He felt hollowed out. He had treated Lorena with the same ruthless disposability he applied to underperforming assets, and the act left a foul taste in his mouth. He was so focused on managing the consequences, on silencing the players, that he failed to see the real nature of his problem. His issue wasn't Lorena. It wasn't even Ruth's anger. It was the man staring back at him in the reflective surface of his darkened computer screen, a man who broke everything he touched and then tried to pay for the damages, never understanding that the most valuable things had no price tag at all. Monday morning arrived like a death knell. At precisely 9:01 a.m., an email landed in the inbox of Simon's personal attorney. It was from Eleanor Vance, a name that sent a chill down the spine of every high-powered man in New York. She was Ruth's legal counsel, and her opening salvo was not a request for a meeting, but a formal petition for divorce, citing adultery, accompanied by a motion to freeze a significant portion of Simon's personal assets pending discovery. Simon stared at the forwarded email, his blood running cold. This wasn't a quiet, dignified separation. This was a declaration of total war. Eleanor Vance didn't negotiate. She eviscerated. The days that followed were a blur of humiliating procedures. He was forced to produce financial records, travel itineraries, and credit card statements. His life was being laid bare, not for his wife in a tearful conversation, but for a team of ruthless lawyers who picked through the details of his betrayal with forensic detachment. The affair with Lorena wasn't a secret shame anymore. It was Exhibit A. The news broke on page 6 a week later. Tech mogul Simon Nolan's marriage implodes amid cheating scandal. A source close to the couple had leaked the story. The article painted a damning picture. The brilliant, self-made billionaire caught with a junior employee while his beautiful pregnant wife planned their nursery. The power imbalance was highlighted, casting him not as a straying husband, but as a predator. The fallout at Nolan Industries was immediate. The board called an emergency meeting. Their faces, usually so full of deference, were now masks of stern disapproval. The company's stock dipped 8%. The Melendez acquisition, his crowning glory, was now overshadowed by a sleazy scandal. He was a liability. Your personal life is becoming a material risk to this company's reputation, Simon, the chairman told him, his voice grim. You need to get this under control. Quietly and quickly. But there was nothing quiet or quick about it. Ruth, guided by her lawyer, refused all direct contact. All communication was filtered through legal channels. She was no longer the soft, forgiving woman he knew. She was an implacable adversary, a force of nature he had foolishly unleashed. The stress began to take its toll. Simon stopped sleeping. He lost weight. He'd walk through his empty, silent brownstone, the silence amplifying his loneliness. The nursery door remained closed, a silent monument to his failure. One night, in a fit of despair, he opened it. The sight of the empty crib, the little stack of baby clothes Ruth had folded on the changing table, finally broke through his layers of arrogance and denial. He sank to the floor, surrounded by the ghosts of a future he had murdered, and wept. Not for his stock price or his reputation, but for the loss of it all. The warmth of Ruth's hand in his, the sound of her laughter, the feel of his unborn child kicking. He finally understood what Louise had tried to tell him. He had traded something priceless for something worthless. Meanwhile, Ruth was finding her footing. She and Chloe had rented a quiet, sunlit apartment on the Upper West Side, far from the memories of her old life. She focused on two things with singular intensity: her health and the baby. She practiced prenatal yoga. She took long walks in Riverside Park. She met with a therapist who helped her navigate the treacherous currents of her grief and rage. She was slowly transforming. The ordeal was stripping away the softer, more pliant parts of her, revealing a core of steel she never knew she possessed. She learned about financial statements and legal strategy. She was no longer just Simon Nolan's wife. She was Ruth Matthews, a woman fighting for her and her child's future. One afternoon, a courier delivered a small, plain box to her apartment. Inside was an unsigned note and a USB drive. The note contained a single sentence: "He deserves to lose." You deserve to win. Puzzled, she inserted the drive into her laptop. It contained copies of Simon's hidden expense reports, offshore account details, and damning email exchanges, not just with Lorena, but with others. It was a complete roadmap of his financial and personal deceptions, far more detailed than anything her lawyers had yet uncovered. There was no indication of who sent it. But Ruth had a suspicion. It was a pawn's final move, a quiet act of solidarity from another woman he had broken and discarded. She handed it all over to Eleanor Vance. The war had just become a slaughter. 3 months passed. The divorce proceedings were brutal and swift. Armed with the anonymous information, Ruth's legal team had Simon backed into a corner. He had 2 choices: a protracted, public court battle that would drag his name, his company, and his indiscretions through the mud for years, or a quiet, massive settlement. Guided by a weary Louise, who had stepped in as a mediator, Simon chose the latter. He signed the papers in his lawyer's sterile conference room. The settlement was staggering. He lost the brownstone, a significant portion of his personal fortune, and a chunk of his company stock, which would be placed in a trust for his child. The signature on the page felt like signing his own obituary. He had lost the war, but with the loss came a strange, unexpected sense of peace. The fight was over. There were no more lies to tell, no more narratives to control. There was only the stark, ugly truth of what he had done, and the consequences he now had to live with. He started seeing a therapist, something the old Simon would have scoffed at. He began the painful work of excavating the roots of his behavior, his insecurity, his crippling fear of losing control, his transactional view of human relationships. He learned to sit with his shame instead of running from it. He sold his flashy sports car and started taking the subway. He downsized from his penthouse to a modest apartment. He poured his energy back into his company, not with the arrogant swagger of before, but with a newfound humility. He listened more than he talked. His employees noticed the change. The tyrant was gone, replaced by a leader who seemed more human, more fallible. He knew he had no right to ask for Ruth's forgiveness, but he had to try to earn the right to be a father. A week before her due date, he sent a single, simple email to her personal address, which he hoped she still used. Ruth, I know I have no right to ask you for anything. What I did is unforgivable, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to understand the damage I caused. I don't expect you to ever forgive me. But our child is coming into this world, and that child deserves a father. If you will let me, I want to be that man. Not the man I was, but a better one. I will accept any conditions, any boundaries you set. I just want a chance to be present in our child's life. If you say no, I will understand, and I will disappear. The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, I hope you have a safe and healthy delivery. Simon. He sent it and felt a profound terror. He had finally relinquished control. Ruth read the email in her quiet apartment, her swollen belly a constant reminder of the life about to begin. Her initial instinct was to delete it, to shield her child from this man completely. But as she reread his words, she saw something that had been absent from all his previous desperate attempts, the absence of excuses, the absence of demands. There was only accountability and a humble request. 2 days later, she went into labor. It was a long and difficult delivery, with Chloe by her side. In the early hours of the morning, a baby girl, Amelia, was born, healthy and crying with a lung power that startled the entire maternity ward. The next day, as Ruth held her daughter, a nurse knocked softly on the door. "There's a Simon Nolan here to see you. Should I send him in?" Ruth's heart pounded. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face of her daughter, a being of pure innocence who deserved all the love in the world. She took a deep breath and made a decision. "Yes," she said, "send him in." Simon entered the room, looking nervous and smaller than she remembered. He was holding a single, small teddy bear. His eyes fell on the baby in Ruth's arms, and they filled with a raw, unguarded awe that was completely genuine. He didn't approach. He stood by the door, waiting for permission. "You can come closer, Simon," Ruth said, her voice quiet but steady. He walked to the bedside and looked down at his daughter. A single tear traced a path down his cheek. "She's perfect. Her name is Amelia," Ruth said. He looked at Ruth then, his eyes full of a sorrow so deep it seemed endless. "Thank you, Ruth, for this. It's more than I deserve." "This isn't for you, Simon," she replied, her voice gentle but firm, drawing the boundary he had offered to respect. "It's for her. You can be her father. But we are not a family. We will be partners in raising her, and that is all. There is no going back for us." He nodded, a flicker of pain crossing his face, but he accepted it. "I understand. I will spend my life earning her love and your respect as a co-parent." Ruth looked from the broken man who was her ex-husband to the new life in her arms. It wasn't the future she had dreamed of, but it was a future nonetheless. A different kind of family, forged not from a perfect love story, but from the ashes of a devastating betrayal and the slow, arduous, and uncertain path to redemption. What a journey! From the height of a glass tower to the quiet humility of a hospital room, we've seen a world shatter and be rebuilt in a completely new way. Ruth's story is a powerful reminder that out of the deepest betrayal can rise an unbreakable strength. She didn't just survive. She found her power, her voice, and a new future for herself and her daughter. And Simon's path shows us that true redemption isn't about winning back what you lost, but about becoming worthy of what you hope to earn. It's a messy, complicated, and deeply human story about the consequences of our choices and the courage it takes to build a new life from the wreckage. What would you have done in Ruth's position? Do you believe someone like Simon can truly change for the better? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who loves a powerful drama, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional stories that feel just like real life.